Hello, and a very warm welcome to the final World Horse Welfare Wednesday webinar of the 2023-2024 season. You're kindly joining us by Zoom, and many of you will know the drill already. We're just going to mark time for a moment until our Facebook Live followers also. And it's wonderful to welcome also our Facebook Live followers to the final World Horse Welfare Wednesday webinar of 2023-2024, Research Unbridled, and tackling the grim disease of equine grass sickness. Now, many of you will have joined us before, so you know the order. We have been running these since 2020. Every single one of our webinars is available on our YouTube channel, and we will put a link up to that in the chat. So please do, when you've listened to today's webinar, share that with your friends and family and push out, because it is a great resource to be able to help all of us as we sort of strive to be better horse owners. As I say, this is the final webinar of this series, but we will be starting again in November 2024. Sounds like a long time away, but it'll be with us very soon. And if you've got any thoughts on what you would like us to cover in future webinars, then please do email us on education@worldhorsewelfare.org. Back to this evening, we have got three great presenters in Beth, Tanith, and Hayley, and we're going to focus very much around equine grass sickness and how we can tackle it, a disease that's we've known about for over a century, but we're still grappling with it. And for those of us who had interactions with equine grass sickness, we know that it really does strike the fear of the good Lord himself into each and every one of us when the risk of equine grass sickness is so real. And I think it's something that's very close to the heart of World Horse Welfare. We have a centre up in Aberdeenshire, Bellway Farm near Boyne, and that we've had many cases of equine grass sickness. But the reality is, as we were just talking about before this webinar, we have 4 centres, and all of our centres across the country have had cases of equine grass sickness. So the form is that our 3 great presenters are each going to present for 10 minutes. Then we're going to have a short sort of structured Q&A between the 4 of us, and then it's very much open to you. So please do put your questions. If you're on Zoom, then please use the Q&A function to put your questions in. By all means, chat on the chat function, but it's so much easier for me if you could put the questions in the Q&A function. And if you're on Facebook Live, then please put your questions on the comments function, and we will transfer those across to Zoom and hopefully get those answered too. And remember, if you're on Zoom, you can upvote questions. If it's a question that you like, you can upvote it, and that will bring it to the top of the list for those. So I think that's all the instructions we need for today. And as before, we would love a quick poll question, which involves me sharing my screen, which is always a bit of a struggle until I can find, let's bring that down. So here we go. I need to share that, and I need to go to that, and then you would think I would have done this before, but I struggle every. So this is where we are: Research Unbridled, tackling equine grass sickness. And before we get going, just a quick poll question: have you heard of the Grass Sickness Biobank? Yes, no, and I'm not sure. So nice and simple question, just to get a feel, because the biobank will be something that we'll talk a lot about over the next hour and a quarter. And so I am delighted to introduce our 3 panelists. The first of whom, a great friend of World Horse Welfare, Beth Wells, who I love the fact that she was a student at Moredun, or studied for a PhD, and has never left, and has been a real guru when it comes to the whole issue of the equine grass sickness research program. And she has an interest in all things equine, having been a lifelong Highland pony breeder. And when we were chatting before, I said, what was your first interaction with horses? She said, my granny taught me to ride bareback, riding backwards. Probably not something you can do nowadays, but it stood her in good stead for her future career. So Beth, it's brilliant to have you with us. Also like to take the opportunity to introduce our second speaker, which is Tanith. And I have to say, I don't think we've had speakers with such a broad background as the three of our speakers today, because actually Tanith started her PhD in focus around Alzheimer's. But having this background in both neuroscience and immunology has given her very different and illuminating perspectives on equine grass sickness. So Tanith, it's great to have you with us. And our third speaker is Hayley Coulson, who has a PhD in glaciology. She did tell me one of her quirky facts was the fact that in a lot of her field trips, she has had to go to some fairly challenging landscapes, and she never managed to hurt herself significantly falling down any crevices, which is a real challenge, I can imagine. And as you can see, she is bringing data, sort of this meteorological data, because as anyone who knows anything about grass sickness knows that there is a lot of thoughts and feelings around particular weather patterns and how they may actually contribute to cases of equine grass sickness. And very involved, obviously, in the Biobank initiative. Hayley also has rabbits, and she's taught her rabbit tricks. What can it do? It can come to target, it can spin, and it can beg. Maybe we'll get a little understanding of how Hayley managed to do that with her rabbits during the course of the evening. So I'm going to stop sharing, and before I'm going to hand over to Beth, I'm going to ask Basil just to give us the results of the poll. So that actually, I'm really surprised. I mean, maybe this is an audience where, because I thought there'd be a lot less people who knew about the Biobank, but actually exactly half of you do, which I think is a huge, very encouraging starting point. And by the end, 100% of you will do. So that's a progress in itself. So Beth, it's brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'll hand the floor to you. You just need to come off mute as well when you're ready, Beth. We've got your slides there.
All right, my slides haven't appeared, have they?
Yeah, no, we got your slides. Research Unbridled. We've got that's there. You can see that.
Right, the only issue is that I can't see them.
Oh.
Why can't I see them? Okay, this is going well. Here they are. Okay. Anyway, so thank you very much, Rolly, for the intro, and to World Horse Welfare for giving us this opportunity, and to, of course, for you all tuning in to listen. So there are three of us tonight. We're just going to keep it really short and sharp. I'm going to really introduce what we've been doing in the project. We're calling it Research Unbridled because it's a new approach, and it's all about tackling equine grass sickness. Of course, it's a really complex disease, and because of that, I'm not going to say an awful lot about the disease because we'd be here all night and we wouldn't get the project introduced at all. But just a few facts, first of all. We are really saddened to say that we still have an 80% mortality rate after all this time. As Rolly says, we've known about the disease for 100 years. We still don't know what the causal agents are. There's a good reason for that, and we'll go through a bit about that in a minute. It's a disease with three forms that are fairly indistinct, really, and have overlapping clinical signs, but not one of those clinical signs being diagnostic. So it is an issue for the vets in practice. They have to piece together the clinical signs they see. So we're desperately needing early diagnostic tests. As I said, diagnosis is difficult, and the gold standard being ileal biopsy or post-mortem pathology. So this is an area that we're very interested in working on. And it is very much a multifactorial disease. And I'll show you in a minute. This is the first slide I ever drew when I was first asked to take on this project. And I read some of the literature and I started to pull together what I thought was involved. And I really scared myself because it was just a complete web of interactions. And it actually looked even worse than this is a simplified version. But it's all about the horse and its environment and all the interactions that happen within that. And there are a lot of factors involved on both sides that we think will come together to bring a sort of perfect storm whereby the horse gets sick. So the first thing that struck me was this really needs a multidisciplinary approach. Nobody on the world knows about all those areas of science. So we're going to need a good lot of help here. And then one of the first things we did was we held what we called a research crucible. And that is really just basically shutting everybody in a room and talking about a subject. That's all it involves. We invited researchers from all of those areas I showed you in the web, and we looked at how we could use new technologies to help us find the causal agents and to find the risk factors. And 4 areas came out of that day. So it was a whole day with a really good facilitator, Simon Cousins, from ex-Landward producer. And he drew out of all of those researchers what was missing and what we could do. And this is a network which is continuing to this day. And some of those projects are actually now going. So Tanith will talk about growing a horse gut in the lab. Hayley will talk about her weather model she's been working on. There's immunology projects going on and equine microbiome projects on the horizon. So that was really important for us to really sort of search the field and see what we needed to do. But the first issue we came up with was there are no samples to work with. There are no grass sickness case samples. So how do you research something when you don't have samples? It's impossible. And we can't make the disease, if you like, because we don't know what causes it. So we need cases and we need samples from those. And what's also really important is all the data on those cases leading up to disease, because you as horse owners, you're the only people really that have that. And that is really essential information for us to understand. So we were really delighted when the British Horse Society came on board, and they have very kindly funded the biobank for at least 3 years of its existence, which has allowed us to, for one, collect samples from cases. So we collect post-mortem tissues of ganglia and ileum. We also collect pre-mortem samples of blood, feces, urine, and saliva. These samples are all collected, processed, stored, and catalogued, and are available for any researcher that's interested in researching grass sickness to work on. So you can imagine this is a great facility. It's an international facility. The funding also enabled us to send out sample packs. So these packs you see here, everything's in there the vet needs to take the samples that we require. And we're also able to give the vets a flat fee for tissue collection, meaning that there is no extra cost to either the owner or to the vet. And if MD this evening is interested in a sample pack, my email address is there, and please do give me a shout. Just as important as the samples are the case reports. And the data from these case reports is already being used across multiple projects. They give us this critical information on run up to disease. They also focus the research in areas that it looks like it should go in. They're very easy to fill in. It's all online. Data is protected, anonymized, so no data is leaked out of there. So there's a very easy buttons on the grass sickness website there. You can find that. So what has actually happened? That's 3 years down the line. I can hardly believe it, but it's 3 years since we started this. So we've now got over 70 vets practices and equine hospitals in the UK sending us in samples. So a massive thank you to the vets that take the time to do that. Over 120 cases reported from 7 countries. And that sounds a lot, but we know this is the tip of the iceberg. So I would really ask any of you, even retrospectively, if you've had a case, please go on and report it. It's really important information, even if it's only location, date, and those sorts of vital statistics. We've actually got over 1,500 samples now stored in the biobank, and that sounds a lot, but it's only from about 70 individual horses. So again, to do powerful research, we need more samples. So again, if everybody can have a think about if they ever come up against this disease of donating samples, we'd be really grateful. And one thing that really did excite me, and I hadn't really realised, I counted up all the little projects that are going on in different institutions across the UK. We now have 11 projects involving 8 different research institutes or universities. And Tanith and Hayley will give you a flavour of some of those, but we haven't got time for all of them this evening. But I would just like to touch on one that we're working on that we're really quite excited about. And this is a new approach to grass sickness reporting to make it just that little bit more exciting, to make it more informative for owners and vets. And this is working with the Equine Infectious Disease Surveillance Team at Cambridge, led by Richard Newton, who've been a fantastic help, and also with the equine industry. So coming available really soon will be a real-time case reporting. And that's very important, because that will come with a platform where owners and vets will be able to see in what counties we have cases in. So you can see now how your reporting becomes really important. Again, for other owners seeing, oh, there's been a case in Norfolk, or there's been a case in Fife, that means that owners can take mitigating strategies to that. But also a further goal, and this is a wee bit more down the line, but we can but dream, is to get Hayley's weather risk model on that. And you can imagine how useful that would be, because then that is a county level predictive alert. So that's saying to owners, look, we know this weather is appearing in your county. Now's your time to take those steps to protect your animals. I should really touch on funding while I'm talking about equine research, because it is really incredibly difficult and limited. So to date, so far, the Equine Grass Sickness Fund, Moredun, who I work for, the British Horse Society and the Grass Sickness Fund fundraisers have raised funds to fund these projects. So they've enabled us to run pilot research studies on all the areas that we're interested in doing. We need this preliminary data, and once we have it, we can then apply for larger funding pots from external funders. So this keeps us all occupied when we're not actually tackling grass sickness itself. Another big part of the project has been raising awareness, and with all disease, the more you talk about it, the more people know about it, the further forward you get. And we have some very well-kent faces, as you can see. Her Royal Highness has been a really, really strong supporter of what we're trying to do. We attend shows, events, we take Norbrook Gut Feeling, our lovely horse up here. We have conference extracts. There's quite a lot on the Grass Sickness Fund website, so do go in and have a look. It's a wealth of information about grass sickness, the disease itself, how to mitigate against it. And also webinars like this one this evening are really important. So the way forward here is by working together, but not only with research scientists working together, but also working together with horse owners and vets, and making you all feel very much part of this project. And this is how we've managed to progress. So I'll reiterate, please consider donating samples and case reports. Tell your vet about the project. They may not know about it. We can send them sample packs. If you want to get involved by raising awareness or raising funds for research, again, you're more than welcome. And what we're doing for you is, our mission is to find the causes and provide solutions so we can all end suffering of our equines due to grass sickness. If any of you have seen it, it is not a nice disease to have to go through with your horse. We're also here to help with advice and support. If you have a case, you're very welcome to contact us directly, and also to keep you informed of advances in research. So I just really want to finish off with this slide here, because that gives a taste of all the project partners. And without these people, none of this would happen. So thank you to everyone. I'm probably out of time anyway, Roly, but I'm going to hand over to Tanith, I think.
You are indeed. You're dead on time. That was brilliant. I mean, just that focus around working together came through so clearly. So thank you to that. And also just to note that we put in a couple of links there around finding out more about the clinical signs of equine grass sickness on the World Horse Welfare website, but also the link to the Moredun Foundation Equine Grass Sickness Fund as well for further details about the disease itself. So Tanith, thank you very much, Beth. Lots of questions I have no doubt coming your way. Tanith, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for giving us the opportunity. So, as I've been introduced, my name's Tanith, and I'll be talking to you about some of the lab-based research that I'm performing. If I can change slide. There we go. So, as was mentioned, Tanith, I recently finished my PhD in the neuroimmunology of Alzheimer's disease, and before that I did an undergraduate in immunology and microbiology. So I'm coming at this from a very different perspective. A lot of the research done for the past 100 years has kind of been focused around veterinary science. I'm coming at this purely from a researcher's perspective. So I started at Moredun 7 months ago, and my job essentially is to make progress in identifying causal agents using the samples in the biobank that have been submitted to us by vets and by owners. So by using samples from the animals, what can we figure out? What can the animal tell us about what happened to it? The first perspective that I'll be using for this is immunology. So everyone will be aware of the immune system. It's what kicks in when you get sick, when you get a cold, when you get vaccinated. And it has a really, really important role, particularly within the gut. So your gut is full of bacteria, and these bacteria interact with immune cells, the immune cells interact with them, and critically, these interact with the neurons that you have in the gut. So this is part of the peripheral nervous system, and there's a huge amount of crosstalk between these. So part of what I want to figure out is what is the role of this in equine grass sickness? So different parts of the immune system, as you can see in this figure here, different parts of the immune system respond differently to certain pathogens. So I want to see how can we identify which type of immune response is happening and how can we trace that back to whatever the causal agent might be. Is it a virus? Is it a bacteria? What can we tell? So there's already been some published research that's looked into generalized inflammation across the body. That's seen as acute phase inflammation. And there's been very passive research around or commenting around something called gliosis, which is a very specific type of inflammation that we see within the nervous system. So I'll be researching that. That also ties in quite closely with my second perspective. So neurons in the gut are the primary target of EGS within the gut and the peripheral nervous system as a whole. But it's really unclear how these neurons are dying. So when we look at pathology to diagnose EGS, all we can really see is that the neurons are dying. It doesn't tell us how they're dying. So there's lots of different ways cells can undergo death. They can die from ischemia, so a lack of oxygen, a lack of nutrients. They can be told to die by the body itself. They can die through physical damage. And each of these has its own unique pathway that you can detect within the cell, how it's signaling, how it's been told to die. So by sequencing ganglia taken from EGS horses that have died, we can use these to identify pathways. So by knowing how the neuron is dying, we can trace that back to, okay, what type of pathogen was this? Was it a toxin? Was it a bacteria, a virus? So we'll be doing this by taking ganglia from EGS cases that have been donated to us, as well as healthy horses that have been put down for reasons unrelated to EGS, usually welfare issues. And we'll perform gene sequencing on this. And this tells us exactly what was happening within that cell at the exact moment it was taken. As I mentioned, this gives us clues to the causal agents. And as Beth introduced, organoids, growing organs in the gut, in the lab. So one of the major issues we have at the moment is there's no way to model equine diseases within the lab. Using animals for research obviously comes with massive ethical concerns. I don't want to give horses EGS, it's a horrible disease, but we need some way of modeling the complexity of the gut within the lab. So there are lots of cell-based assays we can use, but these lack the complexity. There's lots of different cell types, there's lots of different systems interacting with the gut. You've got the skin, the epithelium, you've got muscle tissue, you've got the immune system, and you've got the nervous system, and all of these have a really important interplay. So enter organoids. These are basically miniature organs derived from stem cells. So your gut constantly renews itself, very frequently, at least once a week. And this is really important because we can take these stem cells and they continue to regenerate guts in the lab. And what's really important about these is that they retain the properties of the animal they came from. So if we take stem cells from an animal that has a disease, the stem cells and the organoids resulting from that retain that stamp of disease. So critically, we can use this to track changes in the gut between the EGS cases and the healthy animals. And later down the line, we can use this to test anything we suspect is a causal agent, rather than just firing in and testing it on a horse, which massive ethical concerns. This gives us an option to test it within the lab. So organoids are a very hot topic in research at the moment. They've already been widely applied in a lot of human research, from investigating infectious diseases. So how do diseases spread? How do they infect these cells? Testing drug discovery and toxicology, and even in regenerative medicine. So these are a really hot topic, and they're extremely useful to researchers. So here's a little example of exactly how close an organoid can represent tissue. And this is something that we can freeze down. We can come back to it years later in the lab. We can send it to other researchers across the country. We can grow these for extended periods of time. They're a fantastic replacement for using animals. So the plan is to collect from the ileum of EGS cases and from healthy ileum, again from animals that are being put to sleep for reasons unrelated, grow these organoids, and then perform a number of experiments that can help us identify what the differences are. So how are these cells different? Is there more of one cell type than another? Are they signaling differently? Are they producing different things? Do they respond differently to different things? And further down the line, as I mentioned, any suspected EGS toxins we can test preliminarily on the organoids, but these also have a fantastic perspective to be used for many, many other equine gastrointestinal diseases. We suspect this will become a very hot topic in equine research going forward. So that's just a very, very broad perspective of what I'm doing at the moment. Thank you very much for listening. And I'm happy to answer any questions near the end. I'd just also like to take a moment to thank all of our sponsors. There have been many more, as Beth already showed, but these are just a couple, including you for listening. And so I will now be passing on to Hayley.
That's grand, Tanith. Thank you very much. And but just remember, we've got questions coming through, but we could do with a few more. So please, if you're listening on Zoom, just put those questions in the Q&A function. If you're on Facebook, then put them in comments and we'll bring them across. So please do get your questions coming in so we can have a really good discussion panel after we've heard our third presenter, which is Hayley. Over to you, Hayley.
Hi, so I'm Hayley and I'm studying at the University of Edinburgh. I kind of fell into this master's because I got really annoyed as a geographer that no one could tell me why there were more EGS cases on the east coast of Scotland. So it sort of got me thinking, and from there we sort of snowballed, and I'm doing a part-time master's by research. So it's taken a little bit longer as I work full-time and obviously do this at the weekends and in the evenings. So yeah, I'll start off. So I'm investigating the meteorological conditions associated with equine grass sickness and trying to form a predictive risk-based model. My aims are to identify a unique set of weather conditions linked to the EGS cases, and then from them to be able to predict high-risk times of EGS from weather forecasts for pasture-kept equines. So there's been a lot of talk about weather in the past with equine grass sickness. Doxy identified that cooler, drier weather conditions with irregular ground frosts were more risky for horses. Increased sun days, frost days, again mentioned by Wiley. A lot of the past weather papers looked at comparing control cases with EGS cases, and McCarthy found that there was not really any difference between those. But French had a look at the EGS cases in England and Wales and found that there was actually clustering of the cases. So they happened in sort of geographical areas at the same time. Vets and owners will talk about grass sickness weather, and there's a variety of responses that have come back from the Equine Grass Sickness Fund questionnaire. So there we go. So if you look at where the EGS cases are around the world, then a lot of them appear in the temperate zones of the world. So a lot of cases in obviously the UK, sort of France, Switzerland, into Italy. You've also got Chile and Argentina. And these temperate zones is where we tend to have our cool season grasses growing as well. So what I did was we plotted up the maximum and minimum temperature, and then of a location where an EGS case had happened. And then we looked at the temperature signature before that case and went back 40 days, and then compared those EGS cases and saw what was similar with those temperatures. And from that, we could then decide what those similarities were, and if we could assign a weather event to them. So what we also did with these temperatures is looked at not just the UK, but we looked at Italy and Chile and other areas of Europe, and the same temperature signatures were coming through and matching to the same weather events. So we have 3 main weather events. Weather events 1 and 2 are based on fluctuations of the temperature, so that maximum temperature through to the minimum temperature. And that can happen either daily, where you get fluctuations between day and night, or it can happen within a week. So you might have a period of warm weather dropping into a period of cold weather. So weather event 1, you're able to match to high pressure systems, which are anticyclones that come over the UK. And weather event 2, we matched to, it could be anything that basically changes from a warm to a cold. So that could be anticyclones, changes in air masses, and movements of warm fronts to cold fronts. Weather event 3 is based on changes in rainfall, and that typically happens when we have a blocking anticyclone, so high pressure that will sit over a particular area for over a week, and then that would be followed by a depression change in the weather. So what we do is look at the risky weather events. So this is a heat map which shows the daily fluctuations in Scotland, and so you've got the EGS case years down the side, and then the months of the year across the top. And what you can see is that the riskiest weather days for fluctuations occur in the spring and April and May, going into June, and then again sort of September, October, you've got a tiny bit there, but very clearly April and May are the highest risks there for that weather occurring. So what I did is we plotted up, because quite often weather event 1 and weather event 2 will occur at the same time within those 40 days. Not always, but quite consistently. So plotted the weather events 1 and 2 against the EGS cases in Scotland, and you can see that there was quite a clear correlation between the number of EGS cases that occurred in the month and whether those weather events also occurred. So May, April and October quite clearly coming out high for this area of Scotland. What I've also got is, so coming back to the original thing that sort of got me looking at this, is why is the east of the UK potentially having more EGS cases? And that can be answered by looking at the major air masses around the UK and how they interact. So we may have a lower risk of EGS occurring on the western side of the UK, as you've got buffering of the temperatures by the tropical maritime air mass. So that will keep the temperatures sort of stable, warm, also would be wetter in those areas. And then as you come across central and eastern UK, there's more influence of the continental air masses, and these sort of drier, high pressure systems that could come in from those areas. And this is something that could be looked into in more detail. Yeah, it'd be quite interesting to sort of pick it apart in a bit more detail. So what we do is those weather events we match to the synoptic charts. So you can see the high pressures, the anticyclones are very easy to track. And you can see how and where they're moving in and across the UK. Are they warm? Are they cold? And then you've got the low pressures in the blue box, and that's the depressions that are coming in, typically bringing lots of rainfall. And if you've got a cold front in there, there could be a drop in temperature as well. And so we use those to help follow and predict EGS cases. So forecasts typically are only good for about a week, and what's really helpful is the Met Office do give you the maximum minimum temperatures on their forecasts, so you can have a look on there and see what's going on with the weather. Predicted 2023 was a really good summer and early autumn for limited EGS cases. It was really wet, it was stable temperatures and mild. So it was really good for horses, but not a great summer for us. And then we can look for the potential high-risk times of EGS and predict them with the forecast coming in, and use the case reports when they come in as well, and use them against the model to check that the model's working and it is picking up those weather events. And this is really important because you need to run enough of them to be able to check that we're getting it right and get future forecasting and risk warnings right for hopefully then giving out to the public in the future. So thank you to everyone that's helped. And that's everyone from reporting the cases, because this research could not happen without the public reporting their cases and people helping that way, because you have to have the location and the time to be able to match to the weather. So yeah, thank you to everyone that's helped with the project.
Hayley, thank you very much indeed. I have to say, we've never had three presenters keep to time so well. That's absolutely brilliant. And I guess one of the things that's really gone through in all of those presentations is that working together and actually sharing cases. And it is so important because, you know, we are only just looking, you know, I think grass sickness was originally recognised in 1907, so well over 100 years ago. And it's fascinating actually looking at who's joined us this evening. Lots of people, and as ever, we've got an international audience, but including listeners from Canada and in Europe, or viewers in Canada and Europe. But not surprisingly, there's quite an East Coast, quite a Scottish bias to those who've declared where you're from anyway, so forth, which I guess is not surprising. But wherever you're from, it's brilliant to have you. So what we're going to do now is we'll open up just to a few structured questions with the panel, and then very much open to all of you to get those questions in. And I can see a number are coming in. Please upvote the questions that are there and put in the questions that you would like the team to answer. So Beth, just kick off with you. How can owners track and report cases for equine grass sickness? You obviously touched on this, but if you could provide us a little bit more context for that.
Yes, certainly. So up till now, it's been difficult for owners to track cases because once they report them, there is no feedback from that. And that was a big issue with the system as far as I could see it, because if you don't get feedback, you can't really encourage people to keep reporting. So this new platform will make a massive difference. And as they were working with the equine surveillance team in Cambridge, and also with a veterinary epidemiologist in South Africa, and he's building us a new platform to enable us to do exactly that. So case reporting real time becomes even more important. If people report their cases to us, and again, it will be through a link on the Grass Sickness website, then that can go live onto an international collating centre, and basically anybody in the world can look at that, as they do now for lots of infectious diseases of equines, and see where grass sickness is occurring. And we are now beginning to get reports in from South America and from Europe, which really adds to our database, allows our research to progress, allows research like Hayley's to happen in the first place. So it is critically important. That'll be online, we hope, I'm frightened to say a month now because that'll hex it, by the summer. We would hope to have it online by the summer, and then the alerts coming in after that. So at that point, we will advertise that fact. It will be on all our social media and everything accounts. We ask people to share it, and then owners can go in and actually track where grass sickness is occurring. But if we could just ask owners to report all of their cases, because we know we don't get anything like them all, no matter how little you can remember, if you can just remember even the date and the location, that's enough for us to start with.
That's brilliant. And is there you said obviously it'll be through the socials and widely distributed. Does the Equine Grass Sickness Fund, is there a newsletter, e-news that people can sign up to, or is it best to keep an eye on the website?
No, absolutely. The Grass Sickness Fund produce a really comprehensive newsletter a couple of times a year, so people can sign up to that through the Grass Sickness website, and that would get sent out automatically to them. So that's another good way to keep in touch with everything that's going on in the research.
Brilliant. Well, there's the first challenge for Basil, who's behind it. Look, he's put it up already. We'll play a bit of sport and go find the link to Basil. He's so sharp. Listen, Beth, thank you for that. That's absolutely brilliant. So, Tanith, if I could come to you, you've obviously great presentation, but just to reiterate, how are immunology and neuroscience related? Because I think many people might not sort of relate those two issues. Maybe immunology, maybe neuroscience, but not immunology. How are they related to equine grass sickness?
So, as I briefly touched on, within the gut, there's a huge amount of interplay and signaling between the host microbiome, so all those parasites, all those bugs, all those fungi, everything that lives in your gut is constantly communicating with your immune system. So they keep it in check, but there's also signaling between the immune system and the nervous system within the gut. And that is actually connected through the peripheral nervous system all the way up your spine to your central nervous system as well. So there's a huge amount of communication between the two. The immune system within the peripheral nervous system has its own special set of rules, and especially within the central nervous system, again, there's specialized immune cells that only live there. So there's a huge amount of talk between the immune system and the nervous system. And within EGS, we think there's some kind of interplay occurring between the immune system and the nervous system. So I've said system about 200 times in the past 30 seconds, but we think the native immune cells that are there will be able to tell us something about what's happening. How they respond to whatever pathogen it is will be able to tell us something about what kind of pathogen it is, if it is a pathogen or if it's a poison.
Brilliant, Tanith. I'm just because obviously, Beth, you showed that slide between the horse and the environment and all the interplays of different factors. And of course, then just when you're looking at the horse, then you've got immune and the nervous system and all the interactions. You say then there's the central nervous system and there's the peripheral nervous system. You just get tired thinking about it. But yeah. Absolutely, I can. So which I guess is part of the reason why 115 years, 117 years on, we're still grappling with it. But let's, it's just brilliant that the Moredun and the Equine Grass Sickness Fund, and there's such a continued focus on it, because we've got to believe, we do believe that we'll get there in the end, won't we? But we just need people's support, both financially, but also in terms of cases to help us help the team do that. So then thinking about the meteorological aspects, Hayley, how can the weather model be presented in a useful way for horse owners? You showed an excellent sort of graphic of the whole world, but it was quite complicated, wasn't it? And how can that be sort of presented in possibly a more sort of easy to understand way for horse owners?
Yep, I think you've got 3 ways that you could go with this. You could educate the horse owners to actually watch for those types of weather. So horse owners are quite good at watching sort of laminitis weather. So you could quite easily put that out. Then the other 2 ways could be an app or a web-based platform where the parameters for the model will go in. So we'll need someone very clever to do this, because this is not my thing. So somebody who can use the model parameters and then put that into the computer to then pull out the risk through the forecast. So you'd use the forecast. You'd probably need to save some of the previous weather as well, because the model runs over 40 days. So using past weather and the forecast weather together you'd be able to use sort of flag areas of the UK that could come up red, or you could log into the app and the app would be able to track your particular location and then tell you what's going on with the weather, even do like maybe counts of how many days have been risky. But that's something that needs working on in the future, and we'll need some collaboration with that to get it up and running.
That's brilliant. The next question, I almost probably should ask this to you at the end, but it might be useful to ask now and then at the end. But so Beth, if I start with you, what will help drive research into equine grass sickness forward? What would be your key points?
You want a list, Roly?
I want to. Well, give us your top 3 or 4.
It's a big list. Well, I think firstly we need continual samples coming in, the samples and the case reports. We need to keep our networks open, to keep our collaborations open, to invite new scientists, new researchers in all those areas we've talked about to join with us. But of course, for all that to happen, the most important thing has to be funding, because we are using a lot of new technologies now. So you can probably appreciate, particularly from Tanith's research, this is cutting edge. Nobody has grown a gastric organoid in the world before, and Tanith has managed to grow one. And this will all be published in due course. But these are expensive technologies, so that's why they've been used primarily in human medicine, because we've never had the money in veterinary medicine to use them. But now we've got a very active group at Moredun who are working on all different species of livestock organoids, but Tanith is a sole worker in equine. So to support that, we have amazing support through the Equine Grass Sickness Fund. Without them, none of this would honestly happen. But we need to continue that. We need to continue to raise awareness of the disease, to make funders realise this is an important disease. If you compare it to diseases like maybe strangles or influenza, there'll be less horses affected numerically. But what you have to remember is for each of these cases, it's a complete disaster for their owner generally. There are luckily some survivors, some 20%, but for the other 80%, these are dead animals, and that's tragic. And that, whether that's a child's pony or whether that's a racehorse, it's still a tragedy. And that's what really we're trying to stop happening. So yeah, collaborators, research, interest, funding, raising awareness, owners helping, giving us samples, and case reporting. Sorry, it's a huge list.
Well, no, that's grand. I mean, and obviously, Tanith, from your perspective, obviously there'll be a huge amount of crossover, but certainly within that sort of immunology and neuroscience, and what would you see as the biggest issues to help drive the research forward?
I'm afraid I'm going to have to copy Beth here.
Yeah.
The sampling it's a huge help whenever we get samples in. Having access to this biobank for research is absolutely incredible. But like Beth said, we need more and more samples coming in as we continue to do more research. And in order to do that research, which is very expensive, funding is desperately needed. We're getting slightly better now, but it just continues. This is very expensive research.
Yeah. Well, that's clearly because it's so cutting edge. And I mean, Beth, what you said about 80% don't survive, 20% do survive, but even with the 20%, as we'll talk about, I'm sure in a discussion, it's life-changing stuff, isn't it? It's a horrible disease. Hayley, from your perspective, any thoughts in terms of what would assist, other than I guess time, because you're doing this?
Yeah. So that's important thought actually, because obviously actually doing it as a part-time master's has been really, really helpful. So the original pilot study I just did at home, and then we applied for the master's afterwards. But actually having time, and it's coming up to the 2 years in September when we finish, following the weather alongside the cases is really important, because you've got the context of what's going on in the UK, and you can marry them up a lot easier. One of the other things, and I'd like to thank our colleagues in Italy for this as well, is they've helped us by providing cases in Italy, and using the weather from a different location really shows up those weather patterns. And I compared one in Chile not quite recently, and again showed up one of the weather patterns very, very, very clearly. So looking at those different locations around the world and the collaborations from other locations really, really helps to pinpoint those weather events. And obviously the case reports from the UK owners is so valuable, because you literally can't do it. You can't do it if you don't have a location and a time, and the weather. So you just need those three things, and then
absolutely. Okay, brilliant. Now, listen, everyone's been great, because we've got some really good questions coming in. Now, what I didn't say to the team beforehand is what I'll do is we'll just go round in taking turns to answer a question. But Beth, I might ask you a question that it's better for Hayley to answer. So just pass the questions amongst yourself. The hot potato, if you don't like it, just don't pass it back to me. That's the only rule of this particular game. But Steve was first asked, and I think, Beth, I'll start with you. So even if there was a risk of a warning of a high risk, so be careful, equine grass sickness, high risk, what do we do?
Yeah, good point. What do we do? So again, if I think the grass sickness website links have gone up on the chat, but there's a wealth of information in there. So all the mitigating risks that we know about, some of those are supported with data and some are yet to be supported with data, which is again, come back to the importance of Hayley's project. Rather than it just being people say that, we have the data supporting that that's actually what's happening. So there's lots of mitigating risks you can take. Not all are practical for everyone, that's for sure. But you just have to do the best you can. That's the way I look at it. And I have lost horses to grass sickness myself. It's impossible to cotton wool them. And some of the best kept horses in the country have had grass sickness. But it's things like we know about, like getting them off the pasture for a certain part of the day, for feeding forage, but not supplementing that with concentrate, because we feel this high sugar has a detrimental effect. So things like if there's a weather system coming up that is this high pressure blocking that Hayley was talking about, I'm not saying don't worm them, but can you hold the wormer until the weather breaks and it's not a high risk weather? So there's lots of things like that, and they all are recorded on the website. It's a really good article written by Scott Perry on it as well, from the Dick Vet, and plenty of information on there. If MD wants to ask anything further than that, I'm very happy for people to email me or phone me at the Institute and we can chat about it further. I do talk through cases with owners. We had one 2 weeks ago. It was actually a young racehorse. And we had a meeting with the stud manager and their vet. So again, we're very happy to do that if it helps people.
Brilliant. And I suppose you talked about some famous horses, and I guess Dubai Millennium is probably the most famous case, and that's over 20 years ago, isn't it? But yeah, there's been so many. Brilliant. Thank you, Beth, for that. And obviously you mentioned that the link that we put up earlier, we'll certainly put it in the chat again, just to make that easy to reference. And Beth, just as a rider to that, you talked there, because when I talk to people who've had equine grass sickness survivors or not, but have had equine grass sickness cases that have not survived, and I'm thinking especially of Eileen and Caroline and the team at Bellwade, our rescue and rehoming centre in Scotland. There's a lot of sort of thoughts about what might the risk factors be and what drives that. And you said some of that is data driven and some of that is just anecdotal and experience. And should owners be taking notice of what is data driven and what might be just anecdotal experience?
Yes, I think they should, and it's pretty clear on the grass sickness website how that's compartmentalized. So the published papers would be the data-driven information, and some others are maybe anecdotally collected from owners. But even I think really the importance of collecting from these case reports is we're seeing patterns. There are definite patterns coming in. So anything basically that's upsetting the horse's microbiome, that's upsetting the horse's system, that's causing stress to the horse, which is affecting the immune system or otherwise, those are the sorts of things that we want to limit. And we learn all the time, and we learn from owners. So again, case reporting teaches us as well what's going on. And the cases are different, and there are different driving stressors and factors come into it. And really, you know, to flag up the help we've had from the teams, Eileen and Caroline and their team at Bellwade, has been a real eye-opener, and we have learned so much up there in terms of the situation they're facing specifically with a rescue centre, and being right in the middle of a very high-risk area, you know, and how they manage and mitigate that. So there's a lot to learn from experienced owners like them and centre managers. So it's a two-way process. We learn more about the disease, and hopefully we can help them as well.
Brilliant. And you mentioned the team at Bellwade, our rescue and rehoming centre in Edinburgh. Please do. It is possibly one of the most beautiful places in the world. It's obviously got an inherent issue being where it's located with equine grass sickness, but you will help us, and you will help the team at Moredun by going to visit and spending some time in the cafe and looking at one of the most beautiful views in the world. But that's not what we're here for tonight. Hayley, Gabriella has asked, and this is the sort of $1-million question, I suppose. What are the specifics of the most dangerous weather? What is the danger weather to look out for? That's a very challenging question.
It is. That might depend on where you are in the world, I think, maybe, when it comes to the end of it. Depending on where you are, depends on whether you get more of type 1 and 2 or whether you get more of type 3. We're hoping to publish this. So the reason I've not gone into loads of details because we're still working through the data. So I don't want to jump the gun if I end up having to slightly tweak something or change it. But the worst risk weather is similar to your laminitis weather. You've got these big swings in temperature in the day. So you really nice and warm in the day. The kind of day, so basically everyone's been drowning in mud and rain. So when we get this nice, glorious weather that comes through, hopefully soon, that will be my warning bells going off. Everyone will be rejoicing, but I'll be sitting going, this is danger time. So really warm, and then watch your nighttime temperatures. If you're sort of over 12 degrees in the day, and then you're dropping through into freezing overnight, that's a really big swing. And that's what these high pressures will do. It'll be glorious sunshine, nice in the day, you'll be getting Barbies out, everyone will be dead happy. But watch those nighttime temperatures, because if they're plummeting through, that's such a big swing for the pasture to deal with.
Brilliant.
So, yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Hayley. That's really helpful. And it's quite helpful to think of grass as a living being, because that's what it is. It is living. And, you know, equine grass stress, and as you say, those big sort of sweeps in temperature creates grass stress, doesn't it? And that you know, has its consequences potentially as well. So, hey, Tanith, by all means, don't know if it's best for you, but are there any links between equine grass sickness and other digestive issues such as ulcers and gastric disease?
That's an excellent question, and one I unfortunately don't have an answer for. There hasn't been a huge amount of research that's gone into the crossover between EGS and other diseases. I think because horses, particularly with acute EGS, go down so quickly, there's not a lot of time to see what other issues this horse might have had. And again, we can only work based off what reports we get, and that's very rarely the horse's entire medical history. So from our perspective, it's really difficult to get a picture of the horse's entire situation. I'd personally imagine there is some link between things like gastric ulcers, which can be indicative of stress, and EGS. More stressed out horses, more stress on the immune system, maybe more likely to get EGS, but I wouldn't want to put that down as a concrete yes or no, as there just isn't the empirical evidence for that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Beth, Maya through Facebook, is there a certain breed of horse that is more likely to suffer from grass sickness?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and that's one we get asked quite a lot. If you look at the results we get from case reports on breed, you'll see the native breeds appearing a lot. You'll see the native crossbreds, and you'll see cobs appearing. But unfortunately, in the UK, we don't have our resident horse population. Never mind, we don't have the overall numbers, never mind the actual breeds. So our thinking is that is probably linked to the numbers of horses that are in the country, but also linked to the numbers of horses that spend 24/7 on grass. When we actually look into it, you know, if you go down to populations, say in Newmarket, where again, you know, they're in a county prone area, they're mostly thoroughbreds, and the horses that go down are mostly thoroughbreds. So I do think that we have to interpret this data with care, particularly around breeds, because I think it is just a reflection on what are the most prevalent breeds in the UK.
And this is just a question from me, Beth, if I might. I mean, obviously, there's huge benefits we know for horses through their natural behaviour, the friends, freedom, and forage that we talk about. So actually, getting horses out of grass provides huge benefits on many, many different levels. So clearly, you know, we wouldn't want a message to say that we don't want horses to be on grass because of equine grass sickness. How would you manage that as a balance? It's
a really difficult balance. Now, so ideally, you would want your horse out on non-stress grass. But all of us, particular owners of native ponies, know that is just not a goer. That's a disaster area for every other type of metabolic issue. So it's to try and reduce the time on the stress grass and to produce the fibre the horse needs. So the horse really doesn't need grass as much as it needs forage. It needs fibre in its gut. So anything that can keep that gut settled like that. And there are ways, even with native ponies, to give them fibre that's not going to really fire up the metabolic issues. So, you know, whether it's a type of horse you can give straw to, or whether it's a type of horse you can soak your hay, there are other things you can do. But I always think now, because I can't put ponies onto long grass, the sort of grass that they reckon you should be when it's not stressed, which is sort of 4 inches onwards, is to give plenty forage, or to put them on rough grazing if you can. But I know that's like hen's teeth as well. So no, absolutely, horses outdoors, that's where they should be. It's just watching that diet. And I think if there's any indication we're in a high risk area, time of year, weather, stress, anything else, is just to give the forage and make sure they get plenty of it.
Brilliant. That's really helpful. Hayley, I love this comment from Gail, who's in Canada, and she says, you know, the type of sort of swings that you were talking about, which create the risks, is perfect weather for maple syrup collection in Canada. So whether there's any correlation to maple syrup seasons and equine grass sickness, maybe we'll put that on the action list and see. But listen, thank you for that. If a question from Facebook: if we're likely to see milder, wetter winters in the UK, is that likely to increase the risk of equine grass sickness?
Depends. There's a few nuances with it. So if you have a milder winter, if you then get cold snaps coming through from the north, then you got the potential for more cases. So if you remember the big graph, the UK temperatures, you've got these safe zones in winter where everything drops too cold, basically, and then you kind of hit this middle point where you've got you're sort of in the danger zone, and then it'll go too warm. So if we get a milder winter and it's still jumping about, so it's warm for a bit, and then you get a switch and a cold air mass comes down from the north, then that's still your fluctuations happening. So yeah, it depends. If it stayed mild and stable, so there wasn't much of a switch in the temperature and it was just very, very stable, that'd be great. Yeah, that should be sort of safe weather then.
Yeah, great. Tanith, I must ask Helen's question because she was the first question. And I'm a grass sickness survivor. How can I help?
Case report, primarily a number 1. And if that's already been done, thank you so much for reporting. So even survivors, it sounds bad saying even, but every report of every EGS case is so important to us. And essentially keep in contact. We'd love to know how your horse is doing, if there's any continuation of symptoms, any observations you have about what they might want to eat or might not want to eat. Are you still worming? We want to hear about it.
Brilliant. And just to remind everyone, how does someone complete a case report?
So you'd go to the grass sickness website. There is a link for owners to fill in a case report. I think that's the new online system is going up soon.
Yes, soon. Well, Beth nearly said a month, and then she went to summer. I'm not
summer,
sure.
yes.
I don't think she declared which summer, but I think we can say this summer. Beth, question from Facebook. If the mortality rate is 80%, are there any factors that the 20% that survive have in common?
Well, there is. So the 20% that survive are generally what we get described as the milder end of the chronics. So if you think about what happens to the horse when it gets grass sickness, so as Tanith was explaining, the neurons in the gut get knocked out, they die. It depends on how many die. So in those very mild chronics, just enough of the neurons survive to enable peristalsis of the gut to continue. So that's the movement of the food down the gut. So as long as the horse can manage that, it can still swallow and it's still got enough neurons to move food through, those tend to be the survivors. So they're the ones that don't have a complete absence of gut sounds, that still retain that ability to swallow and to eat. And these generally we would describe as the milder end of the chronics, and it's very marked. Those are the survivors. So even the other end of the chronics that are nearer the subacute, and we've made these definitions, but they all actually overlap. It's more like a continuum than it is marked different diseases. But it's all about how can the horse continue to digest forage, ultimately, or food, really, and actually move food along. So there are those similarities. In terms of, it's an interesting one actually, because in terms of similarities of other factors, that analysis hasn't been done yet. So we do have a student at Liverpool Vet School who's looking at some of the multifactorial analysis of that data. But we actually could do with another student, probably a master's student, to actually take all the data and do an analysis of the whole thing, so we can understand on those survivors. Because again, if you're listening, Helen, reporting your survivor is really important, because there may be other factors in that horse on the lead up to disease that have enabled it to survive or helped it to survive. And again, that helps us focus where we're going with that information.
That is really helpful. Thank you so much. Brilliant. Eleanor's asked, and Hayley, this is a bit sort of a variation on a question. So whether there's anything additional you want to add, but are you at this stage able to say exactly what are the risk conditions, or some of them? Now, obviously, you've talked about very rapid changes in temperature. Are there any other risk factors that you have come across to date?
So the weather events 1 and 2 are the big changes in temperature, and then the weather event 3, is that one was identified later on, and I think that one matches back to when you've had a period of drought, and then the drought gets broken, and again you get the cases coming in off that. So I can't remember off the top of my head which year it was, but there was a couple of cases that came in from the southeast of England. So as you're watching the weather through the UK, they didn't actually fit my original model, which was looking at the temperatures. But I always had the rainfall running down the side at the same time. And because you knew what was happening in the UK, I was like, well, we've just had that. And looking at the individual data, it was very clear that they had had quite a lot of rainfall, effectively causing a break in drought. So that's where the weather event 3 came in, which again is dietary changes on the pasture is my opinion is what is sort of coming across.
Brilliant, thank you. Helen's asked, is the disease related to breed? And we've already covered that. Tanith, question on Facebook. Is there any correlation with the location and the severity of type of equine grass sickness? So acute, subacute, and chronic?
There doesn't really seem to be from our analysis, but hopefully we'll be able to find that out through the multifactorial analysis coming from Liverpool. But thus far, no, we haven't noticed any correlation between the severity of the case and where they are across the UK. So we see acute cases coming from up north and from very far down south.
Fine, okay, brilliant. Thank you for that. So no help there.
No, sorry.
I guess it's a complicated thing. So all of the likely things is, I'm sure there's have been focused upon already, but they all play a factor in some way. It's a jigsaw. We just don't know how quite to put the jigsaw together. Beth, Heather has asked, is there any evidence that grazing horses on recently harrowed fields within 2 weeks can give rise to cases of equine grass sickness?
So harrowing with and then putting horses back in within 2 weeks. Is that right? Did I get that right?
Yes.
Yes, there is. Yes. So there was a paper, and I can't remember for the life of me what it was now, but there is a published paper looking at these events that disrupt soil or more likely to bring soil to the surface of the field. Aggressive harrowing was one of them. So they were actually using harrows with tines. So the advice would be is not to put your horses back into a field too quickly after you've harrowed. I would give it time until you can see the grass has grown back over and the soil disruption is minimized. That is a known risk, as is any mechanical breaking of soil. So mechanical dung lifting, making tracks in fields, building works, anything like that. Keep your horses out as long as you can. I know it's not always practical, but if you can, keep them out as long as you can.
That's a really good point. And obviously, again, I suppose it relates back to thinking of grass as that sort of living thing. And, if you harrow it, it's likely to give it a fair degree of stress. I meant to say, when you were talking about worming earlier, about when people might hold off worming, and whilst you're holding off worming, maybe do a fecal egg count just to check whether you actually need to worm. And that relates to another subject which we've already covered on another day. Brilliant. Now we've got some great questions, and I'll just fire them around, and whoever wants to pick them up, then do. How are you working with vets to raise awareness of reporting and asking owners to report? Right.
Okay, I can take that one because that's my job. So we're taking various tacks here. In some areas, we've had vets ring round all the other vets in the county. So we've got a veterinary ambassadors group. And these are the vets that have been really keen beans right from the word go, have really wanted to see results and have really wanted to help. So a couple of retired vets and a couple of working vets as well, actually, have taken a lot of time in phoning other vets and other practices, and also putting it out around their practice, because you've got to remember that in those big vets practices, the communication internally is very important. We also have active owners. So some of the vets practices that have signed up have actually come from owner pressure. So again, if you're an owner, there's cases in your area of your vet's practice. There's no harm in speaking to your vet and saying you're really keen to help. Would they help? So we're engaging in all those ways. But in actual fact, I think what's been the most successful way has been the vet to vet talking. Again, we've run vets webinars where we've done it specifically for vets, where we've been much more descriptive about the disease, about the post-mortem tissue collection and how they can help. So a variety of ways. I've spoken at vets conferences, any way we can get it out. We were down recently at Rossdale's in Newmarket, and we had a very successful vets night there. And it's word of mouth. And it's building up the momentum, which we know takes time, but it's a continual thing we're working on. Any further ideas, please let us know.
Brilliant. Well, yeah, absolutely. So Eileen, who I believe is World Horse Welfare, Eileen, she has asked, and I think it's a really interesting question, because especially when you think about strangled, people are embarrassed about it. One of the great challenges of controlling strangles is people not, owning up to the fact that a horse has strangled and potentially move it when they shouldn't be. And do you think there's a similar issue here, that people do not want to do not want to say that they've had a case, because it will, so a livery yard or a riding school, that's not going to be good for business potentially if there's an admittance that they've had equine grass sickness. So what can we do about that?
That is a problem. I agree completely. So, we hear quite frequently we don't have cases in this country. Where we dig underneath, they do have cases in that country, but they don't want to report them. Now, it's got a huge stigma, and I can't quite work out why. I can in terms of commercial business. But the problem is, if this commercial business doesn't report and doesn't help, they're going to get another case. And nobody's any further forward. So we do have to try and break this stigma of, you're not doing anything wrong when you get a case of grass sickness. It's hit all of us, and we think our horse management is good. It's nothing to do with that. So I think we have to, again, it's all about raising awareness. It's about letting people know we're on their side. The data reporting is anonymous. It will never be brought up where that came from, where that data came from. However, if we get high-profile horse owners saying, this is a problem, we have it, as the late Queen did at Balmoral, that hugely helps us. And that's what really kickstarted this whole project, was the late Queen asking, what is happening in grass sickness research, and why have we suddenly got a cluster of cases? Now, there's a high-profile owner asking that question, and this has all come out of it. So I just think we need to all keep working together and try and get the stigma away from reporting. By saying, there's nothing wrong, but also by keeping it anonymous and allowing businesses to flourish without everybody knowing that that's a problem. Whether individual livery owners, I know some will very honestly say to clients they've had an issue in the past, and some would rather not bring it up. But I think for the welfare of the horse, we all have to accept that we just have to hold up our hands and say, if we've got it, we've got it. It's better to be proactive, and then we can do something about it.
Brilliant. And I think it's really good that you highlight that anonymized piece of the fact that the reporting system is completely anonymized. But the reality is, you say, the more we are open about it, the more we are, the more normal it will become, and there won't be any stigma attached. And I loved your understatement of the year to say that a high-profile owner is the late Queen. I would suggest that maybe there's no higher profile owner than versus the late Queen. So thank you for that. Steve asked, is there any link to soil disturbance and equine grass sickness? And I think we've covered that one. The answer is very much yes. There's a question from Dawn and also from Shania on Facebook. And they've both had experience of where they've had a group or a herd of ponies out on the same pasture at the same time, and one died of equine grass sickness and the other didn't. How can that be? Tanith.
The truth is, thank you for that. The truth is, we have no idea at this point. So there's been a lot of indication that it could be, given the fact that disturbances to the soil, there's indication that it could be something in the soil, or it could be something in the grass. But then it's cases like this where there are multiple animals on the same pasture eating the same grass, but only one of them gets grass sickness. And that's what kind of makes me think that there is some individual component to it, something to do with that particular horse's genetics or immune system or stress levels. There's something that's causing individual animals to be more at risk than others within the same group. But the truth is, at this moment, I have no idea. I can't give you an exact answer for that one, I'm afraid. It's something we're looking into.
Great question. Great question.
Yeah, it's a really good
question.
question.
Thank you, Tanith. Jill has asked, if in a high-risk area, would it be beneficial to use a track system for turnout?
So yeah, I have my two on a track. They've been on a track and they've been on So I managed to move my 2 last year, and we moved them right in the middle of a big patch of what I would call really high risk weather. So I was tracking it. And so I just really restricted their grazing. I gave them a tiny little paddock and slowly introduced them to the new field, gave them loads of hay. They had loads of hay every day. So potentially, I don't know, it's a hard one because I don't think anyone quite knows the different levels of the triggers yet. So if you go on a track system and the track gets very muddy, but then there's no grass, which one is the higher trigger? It might just be a bit of a balancing act. But I think what Beth said earlier, we're feeding lots of hay and keeping the fibre ration up. I think that's what I go off. I just think that's really important to keep that fibre levels really high.
Brilliant. Anne has asked, and she hasn't put it in the Q&A, and I'll get told off by Basil for asking it, but I think it's a really good question. If you have a case and you are tragic enough in a situation where your horse dies of grass sickness, how can they get their animal, their loved one, to Tanith, so you can use that there can be a real sort of legacy of that situation?
So contacting us, but I think part of what Anne brings up that is really important is it's the survivor cases. So for all we get a lot of the EGS cases through, particularly through the vets, the survivor cases are the ones that we need to find out what made this horse different. So God forbid something happens to your horse, if you would consider contacting us, we would be so grateful, because that would be absolutely invaluable. As Anne says, those are the ones that have survived. There's something that allowed that horse to survive that made it different from all the other ones that didn't. So finding out what that is so important.
The ones that don't. Yeah, fine. Okay, brilliant. Really good point. Dawn has asked, is it true it's more common in youngsters than older horses?
Yeah. Yes. So that's a known fact. And in any survey that's been done on horse ages, we get the most common ages between sort of yearlings and 7-year-old. Some studies differ slightly in that the sort of medians at 2 or 3, but it's that age group that are the most susceptible.
Brilliant. And Hayley, I think that the last question from Gail is there a focus on the stress on grass itself due to those weather things? Do we know if it is in the stress grass itself that affects the immune system, or the gut biome beyond the sugars content in the grass, which may be more a question for Tanith?
Yeah, I don't know any of the horse side, biology side. From the environmental side, one of the things that I've done on the side is test the grass sugar alongside the weather events, the temperature weather events. And I've got very, very limited samples. It's very time consuming. You've got to be testing at the exact right time when the weather hits. But that's really interesting, and potentially, yeah, that's a future project to carry on with, or for someone else to take on. But there's definitely the avenue there, and everything in the literature matches. Those temperatures match really well with what's already published in the literature about stress in the grass and changes in the grass, and especially our cool season grasses, because they will respond to those drops in temperature. So yeah, that will be a really important future avenue to research.
Just to lead on from that, there are definitely changes. So if your horse is eating grass that is really stressed out, has a really high sugar content, that will affect the microbiome. And that's something, the microbiome is something, we think about it as being completely static. So you've got this set of bacteria in your gut at all times. It's not, it's really dynamic. It's really subject to change based on what you eat. And that applies for horses as well. If the horse is suddenly switching to a really high sugar diet through really stressed out grass, that will affect their microbiome.
Brilliant. Listen, I mean, that has been fascinating. I have learned so much. The three of you have been absolutely brilliant. So we are running to the end of our series now, and running to the end of the webinar. And in a second, I can ask the three just to give us a take-home messages. But please remember, this recording of this webinar will be available on our YouTube site later in a few hours' time. as are all the webinars that we've run over the last 4 years. If you've got something you would like for us to cover in our next webinar series, which I think will start on Wednesday, the 31st of October, but I don't know, then please do email us at education@worldhorsewelfare.org. So I'll go in reverse order of the way I've asked. So Tanith, what would be your take-home message from what we've discussed over the last hour and a half?
I think the major thing that I want people to take home is that I know it's been 100 years since, or more than 100 years now, but research is ongoing. Thus far, it's been really patchy, but I'm here. I'm really keen to help find out what is causing this and what the risk factors are. And we are working towards finding a cure and finding even what's causing it. The research is ongoing. I know sometimes it can seem like there's this disconnect between science is happening over here behind closed doors and there's not enough communication, but that's why we do things like this. It is ongoing.
Brilliant. Hayley?
For me, just thank you, and keep doing your case reports to allow this to continue, and just bear with me while I just sort of work my way through getting the masters completed, and then hopefully we'll get that out there to the public, and then it will be really useful for the future for predicting risk.
Brilliant. And Beth?
So, well, I just really want to thank everybody that's helped us so far, because the list is massive, but in particular to our funders, the British Horse Society, the Equine Grass Sickness Fund and Moredun, to World Horse Welfare for the massive help in gaining samples and longitudinal studies and just being generally brilliant, and all of the horse owners who have decided to give samples. And we know that's not easy. That's not an easy decision. Post-mortem in horses or sample collection isn't as it is in livestock, which is, you know, routine. It is a thought for owners, and we understand that. So thanks to everybody who's donated samples and case reports. And, you know, please contact us if we can help you, or contact us if you want to help us. And yeah, just watch this space. We will have answers. We are absolutely determined.
I have no doubt about that whatsoever. What's come through so clearly is that the importance of collaboration and how much collaboration there is going on out there, the importance of funding, and therefore, you know, through the Equine Grass Sickness Fund, you can donate to support this vital work, and the importance of samples and case studies. And as Tanith said earlier, you know, those survivor stories, so we can help sort of try and unpick about why they survive and others very sadly do not. So very much, as I say, to be continued, but thank you for your interest in watching this webinar. Please do stay in contact, sign up for the Equine Grass Sickness newsletter, and we look forward to seeing you at the next World Horse Welfare Wednesday webinar, which will be at the end of October, the beginning of November 2024. In the meantime, take great care, and thank you to our three presenters. You were brilliant.
Very welcome.
Thank you.
Thank everyone for listening.